years, have gone by, and perceived fears and barriers kind of continue to defer our efforts to step outside of the safe world of facility-based, vocational programming. Today, we hope to at least bring a few of these fears and barriers to the surface and consider some of the tips for the teams to use to help people feel more at ease and then build some rapport, when they're exploring community employment. So we'll go to the next slide. So it's not always easy to talk about changing things that have been in place for a long time and sometimes even decades. So helping people learn in a way that doesn't promote fear change of the unknown is something that we might want to weave into our conversations, into our meetings and outreach as we begin looking at implementing changes in our facility-based program models. So just a few thoughts as we explore some ways to address some of the fears and barriers. Relationship building is really important. So people really need to trust those who are introducing big changes in their loved ones' lives. We want to inform people about employment first. Employment first has been around since 2012, and a lot of people still are trying to figure out what that's all about. So people don't want to feel like you're trying to sell them on something, but that they're uncomfortable with, but like community employment. But we do want to make sure that we're educating people and that we're giving them the information that they need to make informed choices. And then most importantly, learning the why behind why a person fears change or challenges can be a first step to help them learn about jobs and relationships in their community. So we'll go to the next slide. What I would like to do, I'm going to go ahead and turn my video back on here. What I would like to do is I'd like to do a really, really super quick poll, and I want everybody to put this in the chat box. I'd like you to post in your opinion, what would be the #1 top fear that you would know about with the people that you're serving or the families about seeking community employment? So if you had to think about one thing that you believe people have fear about kind of moving forward, what would that be? So we're going to take about like 2 minutes, up to 2 minutes, or maybe even a minute and a half, and just post like a word or two about what you think would be a top fear that you've kind of run across when you're working with people. And then we'll kind of look at the chat box and see what people are saying. #1 top fear. I see they want a safe environment. Yep. How it might affect the benefits. Fewer, less supports in the community. Fear the unknown, past experiences, stories that they've heard about other past experiences. Support. The parents feel that they will not have the same support system like they have in the adult center. That is for sure. I'm just looking at the chat box. I'm not sure why my name is saying Christine Zarek, but it's Rayshawn. Okay. Hey, Rayshawn. Should I be on the Zoom? Yes, you're in the right place. Any others? Anybody have any other things that they might think would be fears or barriers? Having a safe environment with less imagined supports in the community? Definitely. Okay. Well, I think if that's a nice collection of fears, and we're going to be addressing a lot of these are the ones that we're going to be addressing. So we're going to have some tips for how we're going to address some of those things. So these are fears that we definitely have encountered, and so we're going to be talking pretty much about all of those. But I just wondered, from your perspective, what some of the things that you have heard. So let's move on. So the following list of fears and barriers it's not going to be all inclusive, but it is a good sampling of some common things that we've encountered over the years. So these are things that I've either heard from families or individuals over many, many years. And then things that I've also talked with staff about and different people who are working in the field about what they've kind of encountered. So what you're going to be seeing is that sampling of the different fears and barriers. So we will go on to the next slide. So here we go. Common fears associated with getting a job in the community. So as you can see, a lot of them are matching up with what we put in our chat box. A fear will be setting, and these are quotes from mostly from family members, and then some of them from the individuals, but mostly from family members and people that support people who are working in workshop settings. I fear we'll be setting her up to fail. I'm afraid of how he'll be treated in the community. I'm afraid she'll lose her benefits if she gets a job. I'm afraid of leaving my job at the workshop. I'm afraid that I won't see my friends at the workshop anymore. We fear she'll be leaving her comfort zone to work in the community. So these are just some of the slides that we've heard over the years we've heard some from staff, family, friends. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to talk about each one of these, and then the next step will be to come up with just some ideas on how we can address some of those fears. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so to the first one, I fear we'll be setting her up to fail. So, people often fear trying something new or challenging. Parents and caregivers have these fears, and when they're considering getting a job or exploring them. So while being sensitive to people's fears, we might also consider when we're talking about people about this particular field, the benefits of trying new things. So with an emphasis, I'm not going to be able to get that word out today, to highlight the trying part of new things. And I think that a lot of times when we are talking to people, they hear, okay, well, we're going to go out and get a job. And there's not always the in-between things that might occur before getting that job, like maybe a job trial or some career exploration, things like that. So we want to really highlight the trying of new things. So let's go ahead and we're going to talk about some tips for teams. And this would be, when I say the teams, I'm talking about everybody who's involved with that person. It could be family members, staff, SAs. It could be OOD counselors, whoever might be involved on that team. These are some ideas that just, some general ideas to how we might address this particular fear. So we'll go to the next slide. So tip one about I fear we'll be setting her up to fail. Tip one, early in the process, discuss with the individual and their team that success may not be immediate, and that's okay. We really need to stress that that's okay, that this is a process, and sometimes it's success by approximation, incremental success. So we want to use what was learned from, say, career planning and the vocational experience to move forward. And so when you're talking about that, think about the things that you're doing that are helping move that person forward, with career planning, and the things that they're doing in pre-voc services. Paint a picture of what success might look like for the individual. Maybe think about using a modified backwards planning technique. So, say, what is your North Star? What would success look like? And then kind of work backwards. Where are we at now? Where do you want it to be? Where are we at now? And then what do we have to do in between to get there? So that could reinforce that the measurements are focused on incremental benchmarks of success versus game over due to a perceived failure. So tip number 3, discuss with the team that risk and reward go hand in hand. And then we always talk about dignity of risk. And, all the work that goes into prepping for community employment with supports intended to maximize that. So everybody has this person's best interest at heart. And so all of the things that we're trying to do is really to maximize the probability of a good job match. Okay, we're going to go on to the next one then. So I'm afraid of how he'll be treated in the community. Family members sometimes fear that people in the community will mistreat and take advantage of, or they'll be unfair. So unfortunately, day programs often become a long-term safe haven. And I think I've seen some of that in our chat about that, having that safe environment for individuals and to avoid the exposure to the risk. So again, trust is a key factor when addressing this fear, highlighting success stories of others who've had this fear of, and any strategies that they may have to use to overcome that fear. So here's some, we'll go on to the next slide, the tips that we can talk about with our teams about this particular fear. I'm afraid of how I'll be treated in the community. So outline the types of people and environments that the individual is drawn to or has experienced positive interactions. So this can be part of career discovery. We want to think about, what are areas that the person is comfortable with, the areas also that the family would be comfortable with, places maybe that they go frequently, and these are environments that they feel would be safe and that people would not mistreat them. So think about those types of environments just as for initial conversations. Use some of the places noted from tip 1. Plan some visits, possibly take some time to try out a job or engage in a volunteer experience. Report back how positive and possible natural supports can be developed. So thinking about, when you look at those environments, what are things in that environment that would be both positive and possible for the person, or what could be developed and nurtured to support the individual if they're interested in kind of having next steps. And then tip number 3 is give real examples of how other people have developed safe and satisfying relationships. So a lot of times when you're hearing stories about environments that you might be a little apprehensive about, when you hear about how this has happened with other people, it really does kind of dilute some of the fears because they don't feel like they're the first ones who have done this. And so having stories and be able to relate those stories to people can really be helpful when they're having this fear of how they're going to be treated. So we'll go on to the next one. I'm sorry, I'm kind of going through these pretty quickly. I have a lot to go through. So if you have any questions, make sure you're putting them in the chat box, and I'll definitely save some time at the end to make sure that we get through them. This one is a big one. I'm afraid she'll lose her benefits if she gets a job. Oh my goodness. That was, I think, one of the first things what we talked about that came up in the chat box. So honestly, for many years, this really was a real, it was a real fear, and it was the possibility of losing, SSI or SSDI was something that was of real concern and difficult to overcome, even for the practitioners. But there have been huge improvements by the Social Security Administration in the way of work incentives. So, we're going to talk about some of those in the next slide, but this is something that we really want to address up front. There's a lot of things that we can do now as far as having benefits analysis early on. I know in the Works for Me program, we have benefits analysis that are benefits support that people can really tap into, and hopefully they will, to really just kind of take this fear off of the table up front. It should and could be one of the very first things to be addressed to help people kind of move forward. So we'll go to the next slide, and we'll have some tips for teams on this one. So tip number 1, and this is something that you can do, you can do in your facility or in your program, just as kind of a real quick version, just to see what things what it might look like, if you earn this much money. It's called DB 101, and there's a link here to that. It's an online tool. It's just an excellent first step just to get some general information to address concerns about this. But tip number 2 is probably the best way to go, and something that we definitely have access to and that people have access to right now, would be to seek out work incentives planning assistance. And this is services by certified practitioners or even counselors. They're available through opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities. They're also available through career planning waiver services. But I know we have a person on staff who is available to do this for our Works for Me partners. And, we really would like to, I'm going to ask Dustin, if you're on there, if you wouldn't mind dropping Stevens, if you have that information in the chat, or Lindsay.
I'm already on it, Mark. I'm already on it.
You are there, Melissa. Thank you. So that way you would have, this is the person or who you could contact about benefits. So we'll have his contact information in there. And tip number 3, use that incentives report in the ISP meeting. So this is really something that, when we're talking about our team meetings, this is really a nice thing to bring to that team meeting to talk about, okay, so if you get a job and you're earning this much money, you're working this many hours, here's what that impact would be. And so when you have that report in these team meetings, again, taking that off of the table is a major fear. is a definite benefit for helping people kind of move past that and then moving, on their path to employment. So in a progressive way. Okay, we're going to go to the next one then. Um, I'm afraid of losing my job at the workshop. So, participants in VOC programs have enjoy earning money and doing work at the programs. And for many years, they've identified these programs as, as their job. It's important to validate and respect that for people. This is something that they've been doing. They see that as their job. And so we want to be, make sure that we respect that for everybody. And the paycheck is a strong reinforcer, of their efforts, and one that usually gets a lot of praise and status across, all the domains. So risking losing this reinforcer can be a huge deterrent for exploring competitive employment. It's important that to reassure the individuals and their teams that the programs are not being taken away. It's equally important to help everyone understand that waiver-sponsored vocational services are intended to support goals related to employment and community inclusion. So let's move on to the tips for teams on this one. So tip number one, a discussion may be due for individuals to help them better understand the purpose of vocab services. And I think that this is not just for the individuals, but this is for the team in general, to make sure that, when you're having your ISP, your annual ISPs, that when you're planning for vocab services, it's important to emphasize that the efforts of the workshop are not being discounted, but their program goals will need to focus on preparing them to eventually get a job in the community. And so I think that that's probably one of the most critical and one of the most core messages that we want to communicate to people. The why behind vocab is to help prepare for path movement. So that would be tip number one, is just to kind of make sure that is messaged at the very beginning and that people are all on the same page for that. Discuss examples of how other individuals have explored community employment and have not lost their program and training opportunities at the workshop if they needed to return while continuing to seek employment. And tip number three, assure the individual and their team that the rules, they're not so new now, are intended to support personal growth, independence, and increased connection to their community. So those are some tips for people who may fear leaving their job at the workshop. Before we move on to the next one, I want to go back to messaging just a little bit. And I think that when we're talking to people about the activities that they're doing in vocational habilitation services, that, we use the term "my job" at the workshop. We really, again, that kind of unfortunately cements, where people are thinking their reason for what they're doing is all about. So I think that we want to consider what our messaging sounds like, the words that we use, and how often, the frequency that we message these things. So we want to make sure that people have a clear understanding of why they're receiving vocational habilitation services. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides down the road, but we're going to move on to the next one now. I'm afraid that I won't see my friends at the workshop anymore. So sometimes individuals develop many of their friendships or acquaintances at the day program. And the fear of losing that, it's very real. Making friends isn't easy. And it's whether you have a disability or not. So in addition to peers at the day program, staff sometimes take on that role of friend and become a familiar face and welcoming presence. So the fear of losing friends at the workshop and difficulty developing new friends is a bit of a double whammy for people. So that's something that, we really want to be attentive to, because a lot of times that might be the only social interactions people have is when they go to their day programs or to the workshop. So let's talk about a few tips for teams on this one. On the next slide, please. So tip number one, discuss an array of social opportunities that already exist in the community, not just disability related or specific. Discuss which of the opportunities might be of mutual interest for the individuals. So as you're having conversations with people about this particular thing, about social things, maybe if they have friends at the workshop that have some mutual interest, maybe there's ways that you can develop social connections outside of the workshop with the same people that they're used to seeing on a day-by-day basis. So maybe talk about things that they could do outside of that. So consider taking time during the adult day program hours to pair friends up. That's what we were talking about, to develop advocacy skills, community connections, social opportunities, and that's all based off of mutual interest. And then practice. Another tip number 3 is practice setting up get-together time. Dinner, movies, or other activities between friends. Discuss and plan how the friendships are reciprocal and can be nurtured outside of the workshop. So again, you have to be a friend to have a friend. And when you're talking about some of the things that you could do in some of the training activities, it might look like, how do you make a phone call? How do you call somebody up and say, hey, what do you would you like to possibly go to the movies, or would you? So sometimes people need some support and some training, just some assistance on how to make that happen. So that could be something that you might consider kind of weaving into the fabric of your programming, what you're doing to help people be able to set those things up, so that the impact of that, those friendships are not seen in a negative way. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. We fear she'll be leaving her comfort zone to work in the community. So people get really comfortable at school or in their adult day program, shelter employment. So this is true as well for family and the staff. So the security and controlled features, again, coming back to the safe and consistent environment, along with paid staff to make up a reliable comfort zone. It's just very easy to get comfort Monday through Friday. If you're doing a program Monday through Friday, 9 to 2, and you do that day after day after day, you do develop that comfort zone. And so changing that up is just very, very difficult for some people. So be very planful, and supported strategies for stepping outside of the comfort zone can introduce individuals to a whole new menu of options that promote personal growth and inclusion. So you have to be very strategic when you're thinking about somebody who's kind of worked into this comfort zone, and the incremental steps that can be used in there. So in the next slide, let's talk about some of the things that might be some tips for teams to use. So provide genuine assurances that the safety, and I think this is key. So make sure that people understand that the safety and the well-being of the individual is always, always, always at the root of any and all discussions about working or engaging the community. And then, as I was saying before, discuss potential small steps that the individual might take over a period of time that can help them make informed choices about looking into new areas or skills or settings. Now, tip number 3, consider career discovery. You're going to hear me talk a lot about career discovery. I just believe this is just this is my opinion, but I think that it is just one of the best services that's really come around for us to have in our tool chest to help people and learn about people's interests, abilities, and conditions for employment specific. But I think just in general, learning, getting to know people in a very intentional way. But consider career discovery services as a way to explore these new interests and environments. Focus on growth and exploring new comfort zones. And I think that's the key of it, exploring new comfort zones. Hopefully that can be really exciting for people to think about when, you've become very used to one environment or a couple environments and doing the same thing day after day. To think about some new things and try to make it exciting when you're talking about these things. And request that the discovery profile pay special attention to that aspect of the report, coming into new comfort zones. Okay, we're going to go on to, I'm checking my time here. We'll go on to the next slide. Okay, so we just talked about 6 different fears that people have, and now we just have some common barriers that we've learned over the years with getting a job in the community. So number 1, who can we trust to help find, learn, and keep a job in the community? Number 2, he tried working in the community once and it didn't work out. Number 3, I'm not interested in the community employment. I just want to stay at the workshop. Number 4, how would he get to and from work? Number 5, I don't know of any jobs out there that she could do. Number 6, he doesn't care about making money. So we're going to explore these 6 in the next slides, and we're going to talk a little bit about some tips for teams on how to address some of these common barriers associated with getting a job in the community. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. All right, so Who can we trust to help her find, learn, and keep a job in the community? So too often individuals and their families are not really having a lot of interactions with people who are actually doing workforce development services like job development, coaching, employment planning, or assessments. So many times the staff they see most are if they're still in school, teachers or teachers' aides, they may see their essays or their day program staff. So that's kind of when, those are the people who are in front of them to be able to help learn different things. And so they really just don't have a lot of interaction with the workforce development types of services or people who do those services. So let's talk just a little bit about some of the tips for teams about this one. Next slide. So tip number one, individuals and families might be encouraged to meet and learn more about agencies and staff who provide community employment services in their area. So we meet and greets. We also could maybe do chat and choose. So maybe if you have food, people will come together. You can chat while you're having something to eat, and you can talk about, maybe introduce them to people who are doing job coaching services or people who are doing job development, including OOD staff in there and essays. So anything you can do to help get that conversation about learning about who can help you and here are some of the services and supports is something that is going to help people make informed decisions about getting a job in the community. Consider conducting after hours and lunch and learn sessions. I mentioned chat and choose, but it can be lunch and learns. I know we do have at least one provider I know that does this on a monthly basis. They invite OOD, the employment navigators, and they talk about these types of things. So these can be great informational overviews that you can talk about career planning and meet the actual staff who do the services. So meet and greets. Tip number 3, here we go back to career discovery. Consider career discovery services as a way to learn about the interest and skills and needs. And these services take about 20 hours or more, or some less, and could also be the foundation to develop that rapport and with the community employment staff, in addition to gaining a great discovery profile. But I think career discovery is a way that, the conversations that happen during career discovery really are ways that you can impart information about who's out there, who can help me do this. What is a job developer? What is a job coach? There's just great opportunities for this discussion about who can help me get these services. Okay, let's move on to the next one. All right. I don't know how many people have heard this one before, but this one has been pretty common. He tried working in the community once and it didn't work out. It's kind of that one and done. And that, they may have had a bad experience. They may not have had the great interaction with, excuse me, with staff, or just whatever it might have been. The employer just may not have been a good job fit. So people have tried community employment and didn't have that good experience. They often recount that story about that job, that one job that didn't work out. And so unfortunately, that negative experience becomes the main reason and sometimes the only reason not to try again. So the replacement job often becomes the vocab program and usually doesn't include any return to work strategy. So they lose the job, and so they may sit home for a while. They may sit home for a long while, and then they would go into some type of a vocab setting or an adult day setting without any clear plans to kind of get back into community employment. So let's talk a little bit about some tips for teams to think about or consider for people that maybe this is an issue for them. So we'll go on to the next one. So recounting memories about negative experiences is never pleasant. So bringing ideas to the table about lessons learned, however, can lead to some very insightful ideas about trying again. So this time with more knowledge. So when you're talking about, okay, so what did you learn? So something happened in that job. You didn't get along with the manager. Something happened where somebody made you mad. For whatever reason, you didn't have the right supports on that job. I think that when you bring those lessons learned, you say, well, what can we do to make this work better the next time? So that's where, having somebody at the table to be able to say, okay, maybe facilitate that discussion about, okay, we've learned this. And so what about this, trying again? And again, we go back to that word trying. And I think that that's something that, we really just need to encourage people. Let's just try. What about try this? And I think that comes with, people don't always know what they want until you put something in front of them. And so I think that that's incumbent on us to make sure that we're putting things in front of people to be able to make those decisions to try again. Well, we could explore it. We could do some career exploration. So give examples. Tip number 2, give examples of other people with or without disabilities who have experienced multiple employment relationships before they found a good fit. I would venture to say that everybody on this call is not in the same job that they've had forever. Matter of fact, I would venture to say people have had 2 or more jobs. Now, maybe not everybody, but we still try, don't we? We still move forward because we know employment is important and it's part and parcel of what we do. And so if you give examples, sometimes, mom or dad might give an example. Oh yeah, well, I've had this job or that job. When people hear about others who have maybe things didn't work out and how they've been able to persevere and be able to make it work out, sometimes that's a good conversation to have with the person, so that they're feeling like, okay, well, maybe I can give this a try. Yeah, that one time it didn't, but let's give it another shot. So consider career planning services as a way to learn by asking employers questions about jobs, shadow workers on the job, perhaps even try out a couple of jobs. This will help to narrow down a better job match. And I think that when things don't work out, a lot of times with community employment, it's just a lot of times we've seen this just because it's not a great job fit. It's not a good job match. And I think that if you take the time to get to know the person, get to understand interest, abilities, conditions for employment, understand, how you align those things between interest and skills, then you're going to come up with a better job match. And the chances that it doesn't work out are going to be diminished greatly by having those components in place to make a good job fit. Let's move on to the next one. This one is probably the toughest one because we hear this a lot. I'm not interested in community employment. I just want to stay at the workshop. And I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that. I've heard that many, many times. And we absolutely need to respect everyone's choice to work in the community or not. So where it gets complicated is when people want to continue to get vocab services and work in the day program. So, if we look at again, going back to what is vocational habilitation, I'm just going to read through here. Provides opportunities to learn and gain experience to develop skills that lead to competitive integrated employment. That's not the exact verbiage in the rule, but it definitely is pretty close to it. But the expected outcome is advancing on the path to community employment and then ultimately getting competitive integrated employment. So, when people say, I just want to stay at my job at the workshop, let's talk about some of the tips for teams on this one. This one is probably the most difficult. Tips for teams. So, educating individuals and their families about what vocab is. Again, we talked about this in earlier slides, and the outcomes related to the service is a good first step. And making sure that everybody's on the same page with this. The SAs, they're the ones who are authorizing for these services. The providers, they're the ones providing the services, and making sure that people have a clear understanding of why they're getting vocational habilitation services. Discuss the positive aspects of earning money. So in a positive light, earning money, meeting new people, getting more skills, self-esteem, growing, all of these things that come as a result of getting a job, as a result of meeting new challenges or expectations. Having those conversations about, what are the positive things about moving on, or even just incorporating community employment. Tip number 3, consider career planning services as a way to get more exposure and experience. Again, what we put in front of people, to make informed choices. If we put contract work in front of people every day, that they are working, those are the things they have to consider. Those are the things that they are developing interest around. Those are skills that they're getting. But if we use some of the tools that we have under, say, career planning services or career exploration services, it can be OOD services, it could be waiver services, but services as a way to get more exposure and experience. And over time, the steps to look outside of the vocab program can be made as interests are expanded. So let me give you an example. So last week, John said he did not want to work in the community. This week, we asked John if he would like to visit a pet groomer to see what they do. And he said, yeah, let's try that. So, people may say one time, I don't want to do this. But if you say, well, what about trying this out? Or what about looking into this? Again, what we put in front of people to make informed choices or decisions. This is what we can do to help lead that to a progressive path along community employment movement. So this probably is, I would say, of all of the fears and barriers, this is probably the number one thing. And families fit into this as well. I just want John to stay there. Again, though, we having these conversations with the families as well. We may want to consider about doing town hall meetings with families so that they can understand. If you happen to be a program that primarily does vocational habilitation services, and you're looking at doing some workforce services, these are things that families can be interested in learning more about, and so that they can make informed choices and helping their loved ones kind of make that move as well. So we'll go on to the next slide. This is a big one too. Oh my goodness, the T word. How would he get to and from work? Transportation, oh my goodness, continues to be top of the list as one of the biggest barriers for job seekers. And it really does depend a lot on where you live. So if you're living in a rural setting, it's even a lot harder versus where, if you're in a metropolis somewhere, or a metro area, or, a place where you have public transportation. The problem of getting to and from is still a big issue. Fortunately, we have non-medical transportation has helped out quite a bit, but sometimes the supply of willing providers is not always enough. And so sometimes we have to look at not just those who are doing vocab services, who are also doing non-medical, but you can tap into residential providers who may be able to help out with this. We've come a long way. I think some people are using Uber. People are getting pretty creative about figuring out ways to get to and from work. So let's talk about some tips for teams on this one. So if the transportation gap's a huge barrier, you just need to make this a priority and address it earlier. Again, talking about this, if you're doing career discovery, is certainly a place that would come in. Consideration should include an in-depth look at the job environments. When you're thinking about job development, you want to think about environments that are closer to home first. Do a thorough inventory of the available transportation in your community. Prioritize the selection based on the credentials and the willingness, the cost, dependability. Dependability is a huge one as well. So if you're looking at a transportation provider, that is not, and maybe have some difficulties with getting people to work on time, these are ways you need to evaluate what providers are going to be able to do and make sure that they're going to be committed to getting you to and from work on time. Tip number 3, consider ride sharing or other creative options. We talked about that a little bit: Uber, taxi, and then we as providers and or the provider community thinking about developing more NMT options. And again, we talked about with possibly HPC provider pools as well. Okay, moving on to the next one. I don't know of any jobs out there that she could do. We've heard this one quite frequently. For a variety of reasons, it's not always easy to imagine a person working in the competitive community. So we don't always have that vision or that goal, or be able to have that North Star. We sometimes tend to focus on the needs of the person may have we sometimes tend to focus on the needs the person may have rather than their strengths, talents, or gifts. So, we want to think positive and possible. And, a lot of that comes into, how we talk to people on a daily basis. And I talk a lot about this thing called Howie, HOWI, and that's called hanging out with intention. And that really is a way to learn what people's interests are and what the positive things they have to contribute. And then also trying to pair those two things together, align them to talk about the different types of jobs, and that could be customizing jobs. So not always do we want to look at a labor market approach. So thinking about going out looking, we don't look at newspapers anymore, but looking online, think about ways to customize jobs to fill the needs of the employer and then match the needs of the job seeker. So let's talk about a few tips for teams on that one. Again, thinking outside of the labor market box really does take some guidance and some creativity. So the job developer is usually the one to help paint that picture. But consider utilizing career discovery services to develop that profile that makes sense for that job seeker. This is where you really can, instead of looking at job descriptions, you're thinking about themes. So if a person is interested in working with dogs or cats, you want to think about a theme as opposed to any one job description. We might jump to a job that would say, okay, we're going to look at a job at a pet groomer, or we're going to look at a job walking dogs. But you want to think more broad terms. So instead of working with dogs or cats, you want to put a theme would be considered working with animals in general, and that just broadens the area to which you're able to think about development and coming up with a profile that makes sense for that person. And use discovery profile to illustrate and paint that clear picture of the individual's pins, their preferences, interests, needs, and skills. Pins is a really important thing, I believe, for all providers who are kind of in this business of helping people move along the path, understanding what those are, the person has to offer, what they're interested in, what their support needs, and then the skills that come along with that. Possibly use career exploration services to help the person explore those areas of interest. Situational observations, another great career planning service that would allow the person hands-on experience. We mentioned these are all waiver services, but if you consider also OOD, or opportunities for Ohioans with disability services, they have services as well that pair up with these. So you would be able to do work experiences. You would be able to do not situational assessments, but you would be able to do community-based work assessments, work adjustment. So there's just a whole array of services, both under the waiver, under DD, under OOD, that can be in your arsenal of ways to help people move along the path to employment and help them make informed choices as well. Next slide. I love this one. When I hear, and I don't love this actually, when I hear this, I go, oh my goodness, but he doesn't care about making money. Okay, I would ask anybody on this call who does not care about making money, and most people would look at me really strangely, I'm sure. Often that comment comes up that the individual is not really interested in making money. It's rationalized because they get SSI or they get an SSDI check, along with maybe some other benefits. So when discussing this with the person, what they might like to do with more discretionary income, they usually have quite a few things to add to that list other than basic needs or purchases. I love this little visual. Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy pizza, and that's kind of the same thing. People can think of, if you think of what would you do with an extra $300 a month? So having these conversations with people about things that they would like to do, maybe with their discretionary income, I think is really important. A lot of times what we'll say is, well, what do you want? What kind of work do you want to do? We keep saying work, or job. And sometimes we need to flip that narrative a little bit to be about, well, what would you like to buy? What are things you would like to have? What are places you would like to go? Are there vacations you would like to take? Other things that you can do with money. And think about, and just kind of, I know in the skills training works for me. We have financial literacy, and I think there's lots of things that cover that. As far as what about money, and talking about money and the things that you can do with money, and being responsible for your money. So have these conversations. Use those training things that are available to you. Let's move on to the, I believe. Yep, he doesn't care about making money. So here's the tips. Keep a list of the ideas, and I'll bet that list gets really long, of the things that they would like to purchase. Have discussions around spending the money. So real discretionary income, what would you buy? And we talk about fun stuff in the community. So you compare these things up when you're having if you think about, well, the things we were talking about with leaving friends at the workshop. pair up some of these conversations about money. And so you can introduce, well, what would you guys do if you had, if you had $100 to spend and you were going to go do something? Make it fun. Have those types of trainings or exercises or conversations with people about that. Get them motivated. Like, oh yeah, I would like to make that kind of talk about what minimum wages or what going rates are. So if people in certain jobs, if they're interested in doing a particular job, talk to them about here's about what this job pays, entry level, and then do the math on that and talk about where that math leads, how much money that is, and what can you do with that? What would you like to do with that? So for starters, consider, again, think about a minimum wage job for 6 hours a week would be over $250 a month. So that's one example. Discretionary income can really help improve the quality of life for people. So if you consider the things that they might want to do with their earnings. I believe that is my last slide, and we have just a few minutes. If there's any questions, I'm going to go ahead and open it up. If anybody has any questions or thoughts, I'm going to look through the chat real quick. Thank you, Melissa, for putting the work incentives information in there and Steven Seberg's information. Melissa also says, remember that benefits analysis is a pre-application service and can be completed prior to even filling out an OED application. Looking through the chat, make sure I didn't miss anything. I believe we got everything covered. I'm gonna open up Melissa or Dustin. Anybody on the call have any comments or anything they'd like to add for the good of the cause? Excuse me.
This was just my attempt to start heading down.
I don't have anything, but thank you all for joining today, and thank you, Mark and Patty, for leading this.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate having you on. We have 10 minutes of gift of time. So if you do have any questions, there's my contact information there. Please feel free to reach out. If you we're going to be posting this and all of our trainings on our Livebinders, which is going to be going live, I believe, tomorrow. So all of our sessions we have, our PowerPoints, we'll be sending out a link to the Livebinders, so you'll have access to that. And we're going to be continually adding things to our Livebinders for resources and supports. But if you have any questions, please reach out and we'll be happy to help you out. And that's all we have for today. Thank you again, everybody. Have a great day.